Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are doing a very highly voted on and requested project. I recently put up a poll and you guys were pretty clear about which project you wanted to see. It is this cape here. I think this cape, I'd guess 1950s. I'll get a date on it. I'm gonna do cape 3, which is the short cape because that's how much fabric I have. And there's a fabric I've really wanted to do this with, and also it was like bought on a really good budget, so it's the perfect one to just kind of give a cape a try with. And I also think it'll be nice because it's kind of a springy color, so it'll be a nice springy cape. I know we're in the dead of winter right now. I had planned on doing a coat for this video, but I am a little bit under the weather still. I've been sick for a little over a week, and health comes first. While I feel better enough to actually be working on a sewing project right now, I don't think working on like one of the most ambitious sewing projects to date is the right vibe, and I think a cape is the perfect speed for while I still am recovering. That said, I'm at like 90% today. Like, we are almost better. Just have that final bit of, this is the pattern. I do think that I'm gonna end up having the clasp be a hook and eye, and the button will just be like a decoration piece. Let's talk fabrics. This requires 2 fabrics, a wool and then a lining. So for the wool, you all also saw this in a poll. If you saw the poll, this is just a really nice wool that is plaid and pretty. I think this is really gorgeous. I picked this up at the estate sale in South Carolina that I went to with Drew and Stephanie, so I will link that video if you want to check it out. This was really cheap. I think they were selling stuff at like $4 a yard or something like that, and I think I have like 2.5 yards of this. And then for the lining is actually more expensive than the wool. The lining is just a Bemberg rayon from Style Maker Fabrics. I picked it up a little over a year ago. I've had it for a while. I've actually had this project in my stash for about 1.5 years, and I finally feel ready to tackle it. I feel less scared of wool and cutting out on this thing, so I think I'll be ready to do all this because I am still getting over a cold. It was just a cold despite losing my taste, smell, and being sick for like 7 days. It was not COVID. I PCR tested multiple times. Wild how bad this cold was. Today my main goal is to get all the pieces cut out. If I feel well enough to sew after doing all that, I will sew, but I am not necessarily anticipating that I will feel well enough to sew. So that is the plan, and then if I don't get to sewing today, I will pick this back up tomorrow and get sewing on it, and I should feel even better tomorrow. I would say like I've been stepping stones. I would say like 2 days ago I felt 50, and then yesterday I felt like 70, and today I feel 90, so I'm hoping we'll continue to improve. And again, like I said, I'm putting my health first. I would always encourage people to put their health before their projects and their sewing. I know making things creatively feels really, really good, but make sure you're resting and taking care of your body before you do so. It's really easy as a creative to get kind of caught up in making and kind of forget about the fact we're all in mortal bodies that sometimes need a little extra care. Not a good rester, so this has been really hard for me to not sew for a week, but I've been really, really, really trying to be disciplined and take the rest that I need. But anyway, with that, we're gonna go ahead and hop into cutting out this fabric. So the first thing that I wanted to cut out for this was the actual plaid fabric. I wanted to do this first because I was the least sure if I had the right amount of it, especially because I had to spend so much time taking care to match my plaids. Matching plaids on this wasn't actually that bad because it's such a thick and wide plaid, and there were plenty of like different places that were easy to mark on the fabric. So basically how I did this is I just laid out the first piece. I paid attention to where the arm dots were, and then on the piece that attaches to where the like armholes are, I made sure those dots sat on the same place as the plaid. And then similarly, there's like a cut in the shoulder or a notch, and so I made sure that notch on the shoulder was the same place where the notch for the back was. So that was my method, and it was definitely easier because it is such a large plaid. For the interfacing, I went with, I think it's the medium crisp, or like it's the crisp of the Fashion Sewing Supply interfacing. This worked really well. I have no complaints on it. I think it was exactly the right weight. Maybe could have been stiffer for the collar, but yeah, overall I think it was the right weight. And these, I'm just cutting the 2 pieces that they say to cut interfacing for with. And then I saved my worst or least favorite for last. So this fabric is just really slick and annoying to cut. I tried a couple different methods. I tried my rotary cutter, but I need to go buy a sharper blade. That was not working well for me at all. So ultimately I went with the scissors. Honestly, I didn't take as much care with these just in general because it is just the lining. It doesn't necessarily have to be as precise as the outer part of the coat. So I kind of went with like getting it fast and getting the annoying part over with as opposed to doing it as precisely as possible. And then this is just your reminder that you can buy me a coffee over on Ko-fi. I put a lot of time and dedication into this channel, so I always really appreciate it when somebody does buy me a coffee. You can find that link in the description, but for now, let's go ahead and move into the check-in in the morning. Hello and good morning. Oh, you're gonna come say hi too. Spooky is gonna come say good morning as well. Here she is, she has arrived. Actually, good afternoon. It is almost 1 o'clock. I was planning on getting started earlier, but she was such a sweet baby this morning. Oh, I thought I saw something gross on her, but she's fine. She was so snuggly this morning, and then she was snuggly when I watched TV, and I didn't want to disrupt her. So here we are. It is almost 1 o'clock, and I'm going to get started on sewing this. So far, it looks really straightforward. It looks like it should be a fairly easy and simple project. I don't think I'm going to get this all done today, so I think I'm going to need to sew in the evenings after work. This will probably be like my last check-in before the reveal. Okay, I'm gonna have to move these flowers not in her space. I see you. Okay. Hello. Yeah, I know. You need to be attentioned. I understand. I understand. So yeah, I don't expect to finish this today. I'm going to try to sew as long as there's daylight. And then when the sun goes down, I think I will go ahead and switch into editing Haylee mode. So yeah, that is the plan. Yeah, like I said, this looks really straightforward. I think the biggest thing is going to be doing lining. Lining is just always slick and not very fun. So I think that'll be the most challenging part of this project. Fingers crossed. Spooky. Who do you think you are? Uh-huh. Okay. Well, let's hop to it. All right, the first step here was to actually fuse the interfacing. This pattern assumes you're using sew-in interfacing, but I'm not in the 50s, so I am not using sew-in interfacing. With the fusible interfacing, I am putting on the towel to protect my iron from the glue. I just use basically a kind of sheer kitchen towel for my press cloth. And then it's just holding the iron down basically on high heat and pressing it until things fuse. This always kind of takes a few times to go over, and you aren't really supposed to move the iron around. The reason you see me doing that is my iron will shut off if I don't, so I have to move it around. Even though that's technically not what you're supposed to do, I also get like very impatient and I don't know what 30 seconds is. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. And then with that achieved, I am going ahead and starting by marking my darts. I like to get my darts out of the way. They're my least favorite. This pattern has 4, 2 on the front of the shoulder and 2 on the back of the shoulder. So basically I am just drawing my lines, and then I'm going to be pinning these together and then eventually sewing them, starting at the base of the dart and going to the pointier point. I could be more precise in my darts, but darts are the devil and I hate them, so I'm not. I'm usually just trying to get it done. And then here I'm clipping my threads. I do all of my darts at once without doing like the thread finishing. And then I go through and I clip the tails on the base and I tie the tails at the tip to make sure everything is clean. And if I do it in batches like this, it goes much quicker than if I do it in between every dart that I sew. And then I'm ironing the dart down. These are just interesting because you'd still iron them kind of towards the middle like you would a normal dress dart, even though this is a shoulder dart. So I thought that was kind of fun. And then here I'm pinning the 2 front panels together. So here I am paying specific attention on making sure I mark where the armholes are supposed to be with a double pin, and that's what I'm starting with. And then I am just pinning down here. Instead of following the notches, I am making sure the plaids match. That is more important than the notches. I can like trim the hem and fix it at the end, but I obviously can't. Well, I mean I could because I could unpick it, but I don't want to unpick it, and I don't want to have to fix the fact that the plaids don't match. So that is my #1 priority here. And then I am just going to do the same thing with the back panel. And then here I'm just sewing these, no special seams or anything. I am leaving these edges raw. I guess I could have pinked them, but this doesn't fray that easily and it will be lined, so I don't feel as much of a need to finish my seams here. And of course, as always, enjoy Spooky distracting me from my work. And now with those all sewn, it is time to press them and see how well I did with my plaid matching. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty pleased on this. I think they look pretty good. They probably could be like a smidge better, but that's really nitpicky and annoying. Overall, I'm very happy with the plaid matching on this. And then I am just repeating the same process for the shoulder seams that will seam the back and the front together. Here again, I am paying more attention to the plaids than I am the notches. And this is going to take a little bit of easing in. One side is definitely like kind of looser or baggier than the other, and we're just going to work with that and figure it out. I sewed those edges off camera, and now it is time again to find out if I matched the plaids well. Again, I'm pretty pleased with the matching of the plaids here. This is where I do think it could have maybe been a little bit better, but again, I think that that's just me being nitpicky. In general, I am pleased with this plaid, and I would be pleased like if I bought this garment with the way the plaids are matched. So I think I did a good job, and I'm just being a little bit dramatic here. It feels like this is coming together pretty quickly. Here I am going to sew the collar. The collar is 2 different pieces, and I'll just sew them together, flip them in, all that deal. But first I have to actually put on the fusible interfacing on one side of the collar, which is what I'm doing here. And then after that I will pin these together, and then I will sew them, being really careful around those corners to make sure everything is like even and pretty and smooth. And then after that I'm going to cut the seams down, clip all of the corners really well, and then I'm going to iron it down carefully to make sure it is a nice pretty flat collar. This is definitely where sometimes things can go wrong. So far though, this is looking great. And then here I am basting that collar down. I could not find the notches, so I kind of had to guess a little bit here. I could find the shoulder dots I made though. So the shoulder dots are where they're supposed to be, and then the notches are God knows where. I think this turned out okay, so I think it's fine that I couldn't find the notches, but definitely would have been ideal to find the notches, you know? And I'm just basting this in before I focus on the lining and the facings, because those are going to be more complex. It'll be easier to have this sewn down than be pinning like 4 layers at once. And here we are working on the facings. I am first starting by sewing these together. I always start to pin the facings wrong, and then I look at the notches and I realize I'm about to pin them wrong, and then I fix it. I don't know why visually I have such a hard time with these facings, but I do. So it's a good thing I do the notches. And then the next thing I am doing with the facing is I am just turning up the edge by 1/4 inch and sewing it down on the wrong side. This way there is no raw edge when I eventually stitch this down. Now it's time to move on to the lining. This fabric was not particularly fun to sew with, but we made it through. Here I am just putting in the darts. I did not worry about the precision of these darts at all because they're on the inside and they just need to vaguely follow the shape of my shoulders. The wool will really press them down and keep them looking nice. So I kind of did these a little bit half well. And then I am just sewing the lining the exact same way I sewed the wool, same pieces, same order, everything together. And while I do this, I'm gonna real quick mention the audiobook I listened to for this. I listened to Coltish by Amanda Montell. It just kind of talks about the linguistics of colts, which maybe sounds boring, but it's actually super interesting. And it kind of like discusses modern day colts and like with the amount of religion going down in the United States, how these other places are kind of being stand-ins for the way they're using language. I'm not saying all religions are cult. She is not saying all religions are cult. There's just certain linguistic qualities to cults that can be found in religions. But definitely recommend this book. It was an interesting listen. I would say it's probably not that interesting if you don't think language is that interesting or cults are that interesting. It's not like some of the other books I recommended that I think are must-reads. This is definitely a if you think the topic is interesting type of read. Alright, with the lining all put together, we're now ready to make our little sandwich. I had to kind of in my brain work this out because I didn't follow the directions. The directions had you cut the lining to be smaller so it would fit more, like it would actually be it being sewn to the facing that would keep it in. I don't know. I didn't like it. I didn't trust it. I knew if I did it this way it would be okay, but it took some mental mathing to figure out if I needed to put in the facing first and then the lining, and since we're turning everything inside out, that's exactly what I needed to do. So here I'm first pinning in the facing, and then I'm pinning in the lining. Now in retrospect, as I am watching this back, I realize why they have you do the lining the way you do it. It would have saved me a lot of hand stitching because you would have actually top stitched those clean edges of the inner facing to the lining. This would have worked, it would have worked better if I had done it this way. I didn't though. This is the way I'm doing it because I felt like it felt more secure to have the lining sandwiched with everything else as opposed to just hanging, especially since linings are more prone to like they're more delicate fabric than this wool, so they would be more prone to like getting caught or ripping or stuff like that. That's what was kind of running through my head. I just felt like this was easier though now as I'm sitting here recording this voiceover. It was a choice. So I have stitched all of my sandwiching together, and before I flip everything inside out, I am going to open those armhole openings. The instructions didn't really have details on what you're doing with these, how you're finishing or anything. They didn't even actually really have you baste them down at the first place. I think they were trusting on you to iron it well. I don't trust myself to do that, so I was putting the basting stitches because it's way easier to iron a seam closed and then take the stitches out and have an opening. That's how I like to do it. 50s instructions always assume you know a lot of things, so I'm assuming they assume I know this. Do this on both the lining and the wool, obviously, because for my arms to go through, both have to have the openings. And then after I have this done, I am flipping it inside out. The only thing that I really need to poke out here is the very, very edge of the corners. The collar helps me just pull, like if I pull the collar, it helps pull the seam out to where it'll be really nice and flat and pressable. I didn't have to use my turner tool here, but I did need it for the corners where like the button slash hook slash whatever will go. So that is what I'm doing here. And then off camera, I have actually understitched the facing on the straight edge so that way it would press and roll over nicer and won't pop back out or do anything weird. The instructions didn't tell me to do this. I'm assuming the instructions assumed I would know to do this, so that is what I did. This just helps me get a really, really nice flat fold, which is really important, especially when we're talking about the center of the cape where people's eyes will be looking. And so if your seam isn't like folded well, people will notice. And they never really mention how to stick these together in the pattern instructions. I assume that you want the lining and the outside stuck together at the armholes, otherwise you might not be able to get your arm all the way through both, or I don't know. It just seemed weird not to mention this at all, so I'm just pinning these down to hand stitch them down, and I am pinning the lining a little bit back from the wool, just so that way you don't see the lining from the outside of the cape. And then I'm just whip stitching these down. This was really simple and easy. And this is the last thing I decided to do for today. I will pick this up again in an evening after work. I don't have too much left. I just have to do the hem and stitch down the facings and put in a label. So we're getting there really fast and I'm pretty excited about this. This was actually a pretty short project. So we are a couple days later, I don't know, or sometime after work during the week. And the first thing I am doing is I am trimming the hem to be even. There were just some pieces that were uneven because I focused on matching plaids over matching notches, so the back was about an inch longer than the front. So I am just trimming that first and foremost. I probably could have been more precise on this, but I just eyeball things. That's kind of the way I do it. I'm not super perfectionist-y about this. I only have so many hours in the day, and I am not going to spend those hours measuring an inch off the hem. I'm just gonna cut it and cross my fingers. And then after evening out that hem, I'm just turning it over 1/4 inch and stitching it down. That way when I fold it over again, I have a nice clean seam that will show up at the top, and we won't have any weird raw pilly edges. And then I am turning it over 1/2 inch and pinning and pressing. This is, I think, one of my first times working with wool, and I love how like steamable it is. It was a really nice experience to press this wool, and I liked specifically on the cape bottom how the steam could kind of help you ease it in. So even though this was a round hem, it didn't have very many creases, and I didn't have to use my basting trick. So we love that. But yeah, I'm just pinning these down to get them ready to hand stitch in. And then here I am going ahead and stitching this down. These are easy, simple, just whip stitches, and I also enjoyed stitching this in because the wool was so thick that doing the like invisible from the front stitches were super easy, and the needle didn't resist me at all. It was a wonderful experience, 10 out of 10. I loved it. It didn't hurt my hands at all. It was excellent. And the perk of having hung this overnight is I let the lining bias stretch. This is just a fabric that's more likely to stretch than the wool. Again, should I be more precise while doing this instead of hanging it in my bathroom with all my other clothes that I was drying and just not closing my eyes and cutting, but sort of somewhat feel like I may as well have been. The hem in here is not even. I didn't care because it's the lining. I'm the only one who's gonna see it. Aside from other people might see it as like a quick slip or flutter of raspberry. So I did not take the time to be super careful about this. I just kind of cut and cut and cut, and then I let it hang and checked if I could see any of the lining sticking out. I didn't, so I called it good and we continued along. For this step here, I am just turning over the hem once, sewing it down, and then I'll turn it over again and sew it down again for a nice clean double turn hem. And by nice and clean, I mean very wobbly because I cut this rigged in the shower, but you know, you can only do so much. And we're getting very, very close to the end. Before I do my next step, I am real quick zigzagging my label in. I will show the close-up of this after the reveal when I'm in the wrap-up. These are some labels my friends got for me like a year ago that I couldn't find, and now I found them, so I'm finally adding them into my clothing. I figured just stitching this onto the facing made the most sense because then you can't see the stitching from the front, but it's very securely in. So I'm just going around the label with some zigzag stitching. Here you can kind of see the label. It says handmade by Haylee and Spooky, as if Spooky does that much, but she does keep me company and she does make me happy enough to be able to sew, so I guess she does contribute to the process. And I love the little black cats. My friends did a great job designing these labels. I am just whip stitching the facing down. I am actually going all the way through to the wool because this wool is thick enough and it doesn't show those stitches, and I felt like because the lining was so slick, it was good to have this actually be stitched down to the wool so that way the facing doesn't like slip out. Again, this is something I could have avoided if I followed the instructions, but sometimes I think I know better and usually I'm wrong. And then with that done, I am now stitching in a hook and eye. This is like a heavy duty one that I found at an estate sale that I don't really know what the purpose is. I decided to go with a hook and eye just because I didn't feel like doing a bound buttonhole, and I felt like a hook was good enough and I could just stitch the button on the outside and it would basically look the same with like way less effort. And I could then move the hook and eye if for some reason my neck gets thicker or thinner, I guess. I don't know, whatever. If my neck weight fluctuates, I can then move this hook and eye way easier than I can move a whole buttonhole. So that is why I made this decision and I'm happy with it. I stand behind it. Here is another thing that the instructions did not say to do. I just assumed so. On other things I've made, they instruct you to tack down about 1 inch above the lining to the actual garment, so that way your lining can't just like fly around and do wild things, like it's somewhat anchored to the outside. The reason you just anchor it at the seam points is it's enough to anchor it, but not so much that you risk baggy lining or baggy outside or something weird happening. That is what I'm doing here. I'm using blue thread because it's fine if it's visible in here. I don't want it visible on the other side. And then the last thing I am doing here is I am sewing in the fake button. This is just solely for appearance. I thought this was super cute. It was just a button I had in my collection, and I love a fake button. When I do it myself, I hate it when I buy clothes and they have fake buttons on them. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and jump into the reveal. Alright, you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed that. Admittedly, the park was a lot fuller than I thought it'd be. It was a local park that usually doesn't have a ton of photographers at it, but for some reason there were a ton of photographers around yesterday. I think it's because it was like an isolated random sunny day in the middle of what's not been so sunny. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the cost breakdown of this item. I have my spreadsheet here. The fabric for this was $72.08. Because I picked up the wool at an estate sale, that was only $16, but the lining itself was $56 because I got a Rayon Benberg, which I have no regrets. but definitely it's always really interesting when the lining is more expensive than the outside because you're able to get the outside secondhand. Oh, are you gonna try to come up here? Spooky has really liked this cape. Fun fact, she really wants to use it like a scratching tree when I wear it, which I don't love. The notions for this was only $4.04 because we just had one button from my single buttons collection, plus a hook and eye that I picked up at a estate sale, and then the thread, I only used one thing of thread. $4.04 is our total there, and then the pattern was $32.98. As I use this pattern, that cost per use will go down. I actually think for a genuine 50s cape pattern, that's a pretty good price, but I did buy it like years ago, so it was kind of, I bought it a little bit before I feel like vintage sewing patterns really took off in popularity. Hello, it is Editing Haley here. I realized I forgot to give you the supplies total, which was $109.10. I am quite happy with that price for a really nice wool cape, and now we will continue watching me talk, I guess. For the last, we are talking labor. This took me 8 hours and 45 minutes. Admittedly, I maybe thought it would go quicker because like I don't think of a cape as being super structured. And then we are multiplying that 8 hours and 45 minutes by $32.70, which is what you would have to make hourly to make $68K here in Seattle, which is right about where you start to hit middle class. I think that seamstresses should be making middle class wages. It's an incredibly skilled amount of labor. I just think that also everybody should be making a living wage in general, and I consider middle class living. That $32.70 times 8 hours and 45 minutes is $286.13 of labor. Of course, if you are making this in a different country, you're not paying that much for labor, or you're not paying for labor at all shade to those companies using slave labor. That brings us to a grand total of this item of $395.23. I don't feel like they really make capes anymore, so I have no real judgment on how much a cape should cost. Again, I think that prioritizing a living wage is really important for people, so I think that's within reason. It is a piece of outerwear that ideally you're wearing a ton. And yeah, as always on this channel, we're always going to highlight what labor should be worth, and we're going to think critically about what it means if you're buying something that is $20, knowing that that means that there is not much going into labor at all. And with that, we're going to hop into the actual truly project wrap-up. So I wore this cape to work today. I'll bring it up in a second. Not good for commuting because I didn't think about the fact that a cape and a backpack are not particularly compatible. So I had my arms stuck out and then I had my backpack on, and so then my arms are all the way out. It was like I was wearing a tank top and it was really cold out. So I do not recommend that. I won't be using probably my cape to wear to the office very often. I think this will have to be like a fun weekend thing because definitely like if I need to have a backpack, it is not it. Also, it was funny, I wore this cape to work with this dress that I'm wearing right now, and somebody asked me what the occasion is, and I said nothing. They haven't fired me for dressing like this, so I figure I'll continue, and I realized that was not the answer that you are supposed to tell a complete stranger at your job. But you know, I am not a neurotypical. Oh my goodness. Everyone say hello to Spooky. I think you can see her. What are we doing, baby? Hey, we don't do flames. Yeah, come here. I know, we want to say hi. Say hi. She really likes this cape, so Spooky always wants to scratch on this cape. Like, there's something about the wool that really drives her nuts. You can sit here or you can go down. No, she's weird about this cape. I did wear this cape just for like plain running errands the other day where I had pockets, so I just had things in my pockets and no bag. I definitely liked it for that. I will say, I think, which again, I was going to make this project in the spring, so this makes sense. Because I will say, like, I think it's a little bit too cold out right now for this cape. I think it's a little bit lighter weight because I didn't add, like, I could have added in, like, an extra layer of, like, fleece or something into this. So it's a little chilly. However, I think it's fun. If this is technically a size medium, I think if I had found a small cape, that would have been ideal since my shoulders are narrow. But this pattern came in a medium, and I figured good enough. Definitely could be better fitting, but a cape is a cape is a cape is a fancy poncho. So I think it's totally okay. Absolutely adore the colors of this. I think this is so pretty. I think I did really well with the plaid matching. I don't really have any complaints about this at all, actually. Like, I don't think there's anything I would do differently. This was a very basic pattern. I really think this plaid matching is top notch. And I do like that I remembered to put in my little handmade by Haylee Marie and Spooky label. I'm quite pleased with that. I think it's really cute. I actually think capes are only usable with armholes like this. I have one cape that is from the 40s or 50s, And it doesn't have the armholes, and I find it almost unbearable to wear because I have to like put my arm out here. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm actually debating with my newfound skill and knowledge if I'm going to just go ahead and make slits for the armholes. But yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. I don't feel like I have that much to say about this project because like even though it took as long as it did, I think it wouldn't have taken as long as it did if I didn't have to match plaids. And I'm really excited to wear it during the spring when it's a little bit less chilly out. Hi baby, come here. Yeah, is that better? Or are you looking for trouble now? Yeah. I think I'll make this pattern again. I will have to say I don't think capes are practical enough for me to probably buy wool specifically for this pattern. But if I happen to be somewhere where I can pick up some wool, I think I'll go ahead and do that and make a cape with it. I would love to make a long version. I love a fancy snuggie. That's essentially what capes are to me. But anyway, we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. As always, you can support me over on my Ko-Fi by buying me a coffee. The link is down in the description. As always, there are the free ways to support me, such as liking this video and giving me a comment. I would love to hear how you feel about wearing capes and if they're practical for you. We are containing Spooky until we're done with this because she's feeling troublesome. And what's my last thing? Oh yeah, subscribe and stick around if you like vintage sewing, you like cats, and you like other random things I decide to do, like travel. So yeah, that is it. And I will see you next time. Bye!